He was once a brilliant inventor who, unlike his criminal brother, worked tirelessly to live off his creations. But while already on the fringes of society, one bad decision would turn his life into a story of isolation, obsession, and tragedy, transforming him into a true outsider, both physically and mentally. Today, I dive into the 1987 version of Baxter Stockman. Baxter was one of the many characters adapted from the original comics. Originally created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird in 1984, the character's race was changed from black to white for the animated adaptation. It wasn't that David Wise was unfamiliar with the comic. He was. But the minds behind the cartoon were aiming to capitalize on the popularity of Doc Brown from Back to the Future. In fact, the initial plan wasn't for Baxter to be a villain at all. By the end of the original miniseries, the Turtles would have moved into Baxter's scientific complex, the Technodrome, forming a relationship with him similar to that of Doc Brown and Marty McFly. However, the idea didn't sit well with Eastman and Laird. The Turtles already had a genius in Donatello and a mentor in Splinter. So the plan was scrapped, but they did provide some suggestions, like making Baxter younger or giving him a younger assistant with a crush on April. Despite the frustrated plans, Baxter remained Caucasian in the cartoon, and instead of becoming the evil genius from the comics, he was reimagined as more of a absent-minded scientist. He was voiced by Pat Fraley, who also played Krang. David Wise and Patty Howarth adapted Baxter's first appearance for the small screen as a scientist trying to sell his invention, the Mousers, to a pest control company. Unfortunately, Baxter's invention was too effective and threatened the pest control industry.
So, do you think Ajax Pest Control would be interested in my invention?
Well, to put it in a single word, get out of here!
Hey!
Considering that Baxter had a van and a lab, we could assume he was living off some of his patents. But it is worth mentioning that he had a brother who was an inventor just like him, who worked for the Mafia. While this was a late addition to the character, in retrospect, it made it even more clear that Baxter was a good guy until he crossed paths with the Shredder. After learning about the Mousers, Shredder put all his resources at Baxter's disposal to build an army of criminal robots. Of course, being a bit absent-minded, Baxter didn't suspect the guy with blades in his arms and shoulders, wearing a cape and helmet, was, in reality, a villain. After a dozen were produced, Shredder sent them after Splinter. The little menaces were stopped by the Turtles, who, after a short investigation, figured out who was behind them.
Baxter Stockman Inventions. What kind of idiot puts his name on a death machine?
An idiot with an ego problem?
Once Baxter finished creating the Master Control Unit, he was allowed to leave. Seeing how he knew too much, Shredder sent some footbots to, and I quote, put him out of the way. Fortunately, the Turtles knew where he lived and saved his life. But now they had an emergency on their hands. They had to rescue Splinter from the Mousers back at April's apartment. The Turtles stole Baxter's van just to make it there on time, just before the total collapse of the building. Of course, they never returned the wagon, which later became the Party Wagon. Knowing where the Master Control Unit was, the Turtles went there to stop the Mousers. The Turtles continued stealing from Baxter, and thanks to his technology, they created the Turtle Blimp. You can tell that this extreme borrowing from Baxter would have made more sense had the writers succeeded in making him their Doc Brown. But what happened to Baxter Stockman? Well, the Turtles left him tied to a pole, and we can only assume that he told the police about 4 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because he ended up in a mental institution. Shredder, who was without his henchmen at the time, took him out of the asylum and started using and abusing him to devise all kinds of criminal inventions. Little did Baxter know, he was actually safer in the asylum. Baxter wasn't exactly thriving under the constant bullying of the Shredder, which may have caused many of his plans to fail. Furthermore, he wasn't an ideal henchman when it came to fighting. In the episode Enter the Fly, written by Michael Reeves and Bryn Stevens, and clearly inspired by the 1986 remake of The Fly, things took a dramatic and monstrous turn for Baxter. After repeated failures, Krang agreed to send Bebop and Rocksteady back to Earth. But Shredder needed to send something in exchange to maintain the dimensional balance. That something was Baxter, whom Krang sent to be disintegrated. In there, a common housefly got caught with him, and instead of being vaporized, Baxter was mutated into a human fly. This mutation may have been inspired by an early toy design by Peter Laird, simply called the Fly. At this point, Baxter had been rejected for his genius inventions, used by a criminal for evil, locked away in a mental institution, and now turned into a monster. Deciding he'd had enough, Baxter set his sights on revenge against everyone who had wronged him and turned him into an outcast. Baxter returned to Earth, this time conveniently without needing to send anything back to Dimension X in return. Though still highly intelligent, the mutation had clearly given Baxter the power of memory retention of a fly. Shredder took advantage of this and convinced him that it was the Turtles who transformed him into a fly. Fueled by anger, Baxter joined Shredder in setting a trap for the Turtles, a device that would, in true mad science fashion, send their molecules 1 second forward in time, or something like that. Baxter ended up falling into his own trap and got stuck in a ghost-like state, watching Shredder and the Turtles from the shadows. But becoming solid again was super easy. He just needed to be struck by lightning, something he did after placing himself by a lightning rod during a storm. After discovering all his enemies would be in the same place, Baxter kidnapped April to lure the Turtles into a trap. But when he went after Shredder for revenge, the ever-smooth villain convinced Baxter that they were still friends. Shredder even promised to turn Baxter into a human, if he helped destroy the Turtles. With the help of the Rat King, the Turtles found the location of April, but they were ambushed by Baxter and Shredder, and the Turtles almost died from a cloud of toxic gas. By the end of the confrontation, Shredder and Baxter made it back to the Technodrome. But Baxter, tired of Shredder's constant insults and manipulation, decided to abandon the villain. He made his way back to the surface and took up residence in the catacombs beneath the streets of New York. One day, Baxter scared off some archaeologists who had stumbled upon what they thought was an ancient temple buried beneath New York. It wasn't a temple at all. It was a spaceship, complete with a sentient computer we're going to call Z. While interacting with Z, Baxter discovered the ship had a pan-dimensional warp drive capable of traveling between dimensions. Seeing the opportunity, Baxter realized this was the perfect bait to set a trap for Shredder and Krang. The Turtles, meanwhile, were headed to the same temple and crossed paths with Shredder, who was busy collecting pieces of the warp drive. This, of course, pulled the Turtles into the conflict. Z gave Baxter a new weapon, a Mutazoo ray gun, a device that could transform people into animals. Naturally, Baxter used it to turn Shredder into a fly and Michelangelo into a gerbil. Desperate to help his brother, Donatello tortured Z into giving him the location of Baxter. With that information, the Turtles were able to reverse Mikey's transformation. By the time Baxter reactivated the spaceship, everyone else had left. But since Shredder failed to find a crucial piece of the warp drive, the ship began to break apart in dimensional limbo, where Baxter ended up trapped. Oh, and back on Earth? Shredder was eventually turned back into a human, courtesy of the Mutazoo ray gun, which remained at the Technodrome. Escaping the space between dimensions wasn't impossible, but it wasn't easy either. During this time, Baxter reunited with Z, and after stumbling upon a dimensional wormhole, they managed to make their way back to Earth. There, they discovered a solid energy generator, which Z used to create a physical body for itself. In one of those classic David Wise coincidences, the paths of the Turtle and Shredder crossed yet again. Krang needed a new computer like the one at Channel 6, so Z quickly saw an opportunity to bait both teams into a trap, by, of course, putting April O'Neil in danger. Unfortunately, Baxter's short-term memory wasn't exactly an asset for this type of plan.
Now, go find that woman who's friends with the Turtles, April O'Neil.
Find April O'Neil. April O'Neil.
Put me down!
Here she is. April O'Neil. No, that's not even a woman. She looks like this, Baxter, old pal. Excuse me. I'm looking for April O'Neil.
I'm a little busy right now.
Oh, sorry. I'll take you instead.
Oh, no, not again! I should have stayed in radio.
As usual, the Turtles found a way to make their way to the computer, which Leonardo destroyed. However, a chip with Z's consciousness remained. Baxter picked it up and went through the portal, chasing Shredder. But Krang closed the portal just in time, trapping Baxter in limbo again. One day, Krang accidentally freed Baxter from limbo, and Z wasted no time in taking over the Technodrome. With all the technology at its disposal, Z quickly took control of the Footbots, capturing Shredder and his gang for most of the episode. With Baxter by its side, Z went mobile. The duo returned to the city, armed with some mutagen to create a new breed of insect mutants.
I'll go you one better than that. I'd say it was a 5.5-foot mutant fly with 4 arms named Baxter Stockman.
How on earth did you deduce that?
Oh, just call it an inspired guess.
Donatello tortured Z, again, to learn about Baxter's plan, to turn the people at Channel 6 into insects. The Turtles rushed to the rescue, but April was transformed into a giant wasp during the battle. The Turtles captured Baxter and took him back to the Technodrome to retrieve the Mutazoo ray gun and reverse the transformations. But since Z was still controlling the Technodrome, it freed Baxter again. Tired of Z's antics, Donatello ended things by smashing the sentient computer with his bow staff, once and for all. But Baxter, as usual, quickly lost control of the situation. Panicked, he grabbed the Mutazoo ray gun and leapt back into dimensional limbo. The Turtles followed him, retrieved the ray gun, and left Baxter trapped in limbo. Again. Before leaving, the Turtles made sure to leave Shredder locked inside the Technodrome. Did they bother to turn him over to the authorities? Nope, they just left him there. With the Mutazoo ray gun in hand, they turned everyone back into humans. Well, everyone except Splinter. They probably ran out of batteries. Now, remember I mentioned that Baxter had a brother? His name was Barney Stockman, and while they shared a knack for inventing, their paths couldn't have been more different. Well, sort of. Barney Stockman was very much like Baxter, but had red hair, and he hated being confused for his brother. Unlike Baxter, who started out trying to do good, Barney fully embraced using his inventions for crime. In fact, he worked for a gangster known as Pinky McFingers. Barney's latest invention was a Gaga magnifier, a device that amplified the power of jokes by 6,000%, sending joke waves through the city to paralyze people with laughter. Pinky's plan was to use this chaos to rob the city blind. Naturally, Barney's device became the key to kidnapping stand-up comedians, including Raphael.
I can't believe this is happening. This is too bizarre, even for a cartoon.
As expected, the Turtles saved the day, and Barney was sent to jail. He was never seen again in the series, though he did appear as a boss in the fan-made game TMNT Rescue-Palooza. Baxter's relationship with Barney adds a fascinating layer to his psychological decline. While Barney chose a life of crime, he remained fully human. Baxter, however, sought legitimacy and recognition for his genius, yet he ended up suffering the ultimate punishment, being transformed into a fly. This dynamic deepened Baxter's alienation and fueled his internal conflict, even if Barney was an improvised creation for the show. Baxter embodies the outsider archetype, rejected by society, betrayed by Shredder, and ultimately cast out from humanity. Baxter's downfall is steeped in tragic irony. Despite his initial intentions to do good, he's punished far more severely than Barney, who openly embraced villainy. There's one more appearance of Baxter that I left out earlier because it doesn't really fit into the continuity. In the episode titled Landlord of the Flies, Baxter somehow gained the ability to control flies. He made a pact with Shredder, agreeing to help bring the city to its knees in exchange for being transformed back into a human. Of course, the Turtles foiled the plan and sent Baxter back to dimensional limbo. Without him around, the Flies quickly returned to normal. The episode doesn't have a clear place in the timeline, and Baxter's newfound power to control flies was never brought up again. However, its place in continuity was somewhat explained in the Saturday Morning Adventures series, which is still being published by IDW. Baxter himself mentioned that sometimes he would be inexplicably freed from his interdimensional prison, offering a tongue-in-cheek explanation for the continuity hiccup. The comic takes place between seasons 7 and 8, so any new appearances of the character in the comic are an expansion to the canon until proven otherwise. As of the time this script was written, Baxter has appeared in only 2 stories in the book. The first appearance was in the initial miniseries, where Splinter came under attack by nanomousers. The Turtles had to embark on a fantastic voyage-style adventure inside their master's bloodstream to save him. The second story featured Baxter facing off against Leo, Mikey, Genghis Frog, and Napoleon Bonafrog. Seeking revenge, Baxter kidnapped April and set a trap designed to affect reptiles. Luckily, and for reasons I'll explain some other time, only 2 of our heroes were reptiles in this story. Genghis and Napoleon, being amphibians, were immune to Baxter's trap. While they fought Baxter, April managed to free the Turtles. Though Baxter was defeated, he managed to escape without being sent back to Limbo. Since the Saturday Morning Adventures series has plenty of stories planned, it's a safe bet that Baxter will return, and he may have already done so by the time you're watching this video. Baxter Stockman's story is a tragic one. A man who started out as a simple, if absent-minded, inventor ended up losing everything: his humanity, his dignity, and ultimately his mind. Both Baxter and his brother Barney used their genius for crime, but it was Baxter who paid the ultimate price. Transformed into a mutant fly, he became physically and mentally isolated from the world he once knew, spiraling deeper into madness. The irony is hard to ignore. Barney, who embraced his criminal side, remained human, while Baxter, manipulated and cast aside, became a true outsider, both physically and psychologically. Despite walking similar paths, Baxter's mutation sealed his fate as the ultimate outcast. In the end, Baxter's story is about how instability, rejection, and manipulation led him to become an outsider long before his transformation. So, we're left to wonder, did Baxter's mental decline begin before he became a mutant fly? Or was his physical transformation what finally pushed him over the edge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.